Arctic frost. The Biden DOJ exposed yet again. The investigation you might not have heard of, but we've got the details. Fresh out of D.C. this week. Also, Donald Trump meeting Xi Jinping over in South Korea, the world's two superpowers sitting down for this trade negotiation. What happened and what can we expect moving forward? Also, the latest insane, truly deranged allegations or insinuations against yours truly. All of that and more in today's episode of The Josh Hammer Show. Later on the show, we'll be joined by Alex Marlow, editor-in-chief of Breitbart News, host of The Alex Marlow Show, and the author of the new book, Breaking the Law, Exposing the Weaponization of America's Legal System Against Donald Trump. We're going to get into all the various issues of the day with Alex, who is our colleague over at the Salem Podcast Network. But for now, here's your news of the day. Massive bombshell, actually, just yesterday in Washington, D.C. Arctic frost, which you probably have heard about if you are a news junkie, at least. This was first brought to the public's attention a few months ago due to the work of Senator Chuck Grassley, above all, on the Senate Judiciary Committee and some of his colleagues over in the House as well. Arctic frost was the January 6th electors plot. I'm not even going to call it the fake electors plot, but that's how the media typically reports it. It was the post-January 6th, post-2020 election investigation by the Biden DOJ under Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, and under Chris Wray, the FBI Director, trying to essentially subpoena and to investigate all sorts of various enemies of the administration. You know, what comes to mind here really is that old quote. That old quote about how, for my friends, anything, for my enemies, the law. It was said by an old Peruvian, South American strongman by the name of Benavides. But really, that's actually what's happening here. If you start to crack open the stories and look at the details here, over 9 members of Congress swept up into this Arctic frost probe under FBI Director Wray and Attorney General Merrick Garland. 92 various Republican organizations and individuals, 197 different subpoenas in total for 430 Republican entities and individuals. Just to kind of put a little more specificity on that. Senator Ted Cruz. You might think of him as a pretty mainstream conservative guy. Senator Ted Cruz had his phone records subpoenaed after January 6th and after the electors plot. Why? It's a great question. I don't necessarily have all the answers to that. But we just learned yesterday, courtesy of Senator Chuck Grassley, that Jack Smith, the so-called special counsel who was appointed by Merrick Garland ultimately to prosecute Donald Trump in both Florida for the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case and then Washington, D.C. for the January 6th case, we learned yesterday from Chuck Grassley that Ted Cruz had his cell phone records subpoenaed from AT&T. By the way, AT&T, this is the most amazing part of this. AT&T was ordered by a federal judge in Washington, D.C. They were ordered from disclosing the very existence of this subpoena to Senator Ted Cruz because the judge in question said that if Cruz was informed, he would destroy the evidence and imperil national security. The judge in question who actually did this order, Boasberg. Judge Jeb Boasberg, who you probably have heard of from earlier this year. He's the guy, perhaps most infamously, who literally told the planes to turn around mid-air in the middle of these deportation proceedings where the plane was flying to Central America way back in March or April, whenever this is a guy who's been at the front and center of the lower court judicial resistance against the Trump administration. This is the guy who told AT&T, don't you dare show to Ted Cruz that Christopher Wray and Merrick Garland are actually subpoenaing them. Other major organizations that are part of this Arctic frost, almost 200 subpoena dragnet. We're talking here about the actual Donald Trump campaign itself, the 2020 campaign, the RNC, the Republican National Committee, Conservative Partnership Institute, the well-known think tank, America First Policy Institute, even MyPillow. Even Mike Lindell's company, MyPillow, was actually implicated in this as well. But let's go ahead and actually go straight to the source. I want to play this clip from Senator Chuck Grassley in Washington, D.C. yesterday, telling us a little bit more about what this Arctic frost probe that they have just uncovered, what does this entail?
The subpoena requested records and communications related to over 430 individual and organizations. All of them appear to be aimed at Republicans. A subpoena to event strategies requested records relating to Turning Point USA and the Republican Attorney General's Association. One subpoena to Apple sought records relating to Trump and the January 6th prison choir. Earlier this year, I obtained emails between and among J.P. Cooney, one of Jack Smith's prosecutors. That email exchange was March 2023 about a partisan news article on January 6th, and this is what Cooney said in the email. Can we do some work to nail down Trump's role in this, perhaps with the same process on Ed Henry's LLC, end quote.
So, first of all, God bless Chuck Grassley. I mean, dude is well into his 90s, and he is still presiding over these bombshell investigations. I mean, back in Iowa, they would call it the full Grassley to actually go to all 99 counties in the state of Iowa. I remember that from my own days, actually, on the presidential primary campaign trail in the Hawkeye state. So, I mean, Chuck Grassley just really killing it, from what I can tell, well into his 90s. Now, I mentioned Ted Cruz because this whole story really just astounds me. I mean, overall, non-Republican members of Congress who faced various subpoenas there as part of this early Biden administration. We're talking here like the opening days of the Biden administration, 2021, give or take. Again, this is all the predicate to the ultimate Jack Smith indictment and prosecution of Donald Trump in the January 6th case, a prosecution which he launched in August 2023. So we're talking about the year or two, especially in the first year of the Biden administration. But, I mentioned Ted Cruz because the details of this, I think are just utterly astonishing. Here indeed is Senator Ted Cruz of Texas talking about how it is our friend Judge Boasberg who issued this order I was describing to AT&T.
Judge Boasberg issued an order to AT&T and signed that order prohibiting AT&T from informing me of this subpoena for at least 1 year. And Judge Boasberg gave the basis for that order, and I'm going to quote from the order Judge Boasberg signed. The court finds reasonable grounds to believe that such disclosure will result in destruction of or tampering with evidence, intimidation of potential witnesses, and serious jeopardy to the investigation. That's an order a judge signed. Now, I can tell you right now, there is precisely zero evidence to conclude that I am likely to destroy or tamper with evidence or to intimidate potential witnesses.
I can't help but smile because of just how utterly absurd it is. That's why I want to play that clip for you. Ted Cruz clerked on the United States Supreme Court for the late great former Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, William Rehnquist. Before I wrote my own book back in 2020, I helped ghostwrite Ted Cruz's book on the court, on his prolific career as a lawyer. That book at the time was called One Vote Away. It was a story of Senator Cruz's tales, litigating before the U.S. Supreme Court, winning massive cases, massive arguments there. The notion that guy, with that particular legal background, would be a threat to national security, and that a puny little left-wing judicial activist resistance district court judge would find that he is such a threat to leak and to imperil national security, therefore the very existence of the subpoena cannot be disclosed to him. It's insane. It's truly insane. And in addition to the insanity of the sicking of the apparatus of the federal prosecution wing of the government, in addition to the general insanity of sicking that onto your political enemies, there is just the astounding hubris that can be found in the minds of activist left-wing lower court judges like Jeb Boasberg. As far as where we go from here when it comes to Arctic frost, it's unclear. Now, a lot of this, again, was really just the lead up to the Jack Smith prosecution in Washington, D.C. Jack Smith is something of a bygone era at this point there. He was illegally appointed special counsel in the first place. Incidentally, go back and review Justice Clarence Thomas's concurring opinion in the Trump versus United States case that came out last year to get the details on that. It was just a phenomenal concurrence, persuasively arguing that Jack Smith was unconstitutionally appointed special counsel for the very simple reason that Congress did not pass an authorizing statute. So anyway, the point is that a lot of that is actually kind of old history right now. So as far as where we go right now with Arctic frost, I don't know. But there is a lot to be outraged about when it comes, yet again, to the extent of the weaponization of the Biden-era DOJ against their political enemies, Lisa Monaco, Merrick Garland, Jack Smith, Christopher Wray, the entire apparatus. We're going to get into certainly all that and much more soon with our guest, Alex Marlow of Breitbart News. Other news of the day, Donald Trump meeting with Xi Jinping over in Seoul, South Korea. We've teased this meeting a lot this week. And overall, they seem pretty happy with it. Here was Donald Trump. Here's a clip of him walking into that meeting with Xi Jinping.
And we're going to have a very successful meeting, I have no doubt. But he's a very tough negotiator. That's not good. We know each other well.
Mr. President, do you plan to sign a trade deal today?
Could be. I think we'll have a great understanding. We have a great relationship. We've always had a great relationship.
So Trump previewing a very good meeting. For what it's worth, after the meeting, he actually described the meeting as a 12 out of 10. There's no final trade deal, so not to bury the lead too much, but there is no final trade deal. We await the details of some ultimate trade deal that will be concluded between the two parties. Nonetheless, China did agree to lift a lot of their recently enacted restrictions on rare earth mineral exports. This has been one of the major sticking points between the two parties. So China has a disproportionate share of the literal physical rare earth minerals, such as lithium, which is one of the most important components of advanced semiconductors and chips there. And because of that, they have the ability to exert a lot of leverage and a lot of choke points when it comes to international trade. So they agreed to lift a lot of their export restrictions on rare earth minerals. They apparently have also tentatively agreed to purchase certain undefined amounts of American soybeans, oil, various other American commodities as well. And in exchange for that, Donald Trump agreed to lower the tariffs on fentanyl specifically to 10% from 20%. I guess we'll see what exactly Donald Trump thinks he's getting there. China allegedly is agreeing to crack down on fentanyl exports. We will see if that happens there, because that is an extraordinarily dangerous export of fentanyl, oftentimes from China to the Mexican drug cartels, which ultimately ends up making its way into the U.S. interior in the form of chemical warfare. So this is a major, major point there. But Trump apparently content enough to actually lower the effective tariff rate on fentanyl for whatever it is worth. Again, we are waiting on the final details of a trade deal, but for now, Donald Trump certainly seems happy about it there. What I've been saying all week, folks, is this, which is that China is a serious military power, much more serious, I think, than many Americans realize or frankly would care to admit. But when it comes to the bread and butter, the brass tacks of the economic relationship there, America still calls the shots. We are the stronger economy. We have the stronger companies, the stronger innovation, the stronger human capital, social capital, financial capital, the stronger supply chains. We are stronger in virtually any way that you can possibly measure an economy. Not to mention that China has a real estate market that is in a comical bubble, probably about to bust any week or any month now. And they also are facing a massive demographic crisis due to the exceedingly punitive and frankly just barbaric and horrific one-child policy that the communists implemented for years and years on end. So we'll see where it goes there. But if Trump is confident, then I certainly have no reason to be anything other than cautiously optimistic as well. Finally, before we get to our guest, Alex Marlow, and I really don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, to be honest with you. I'm kind of sick of trying to fend off these insane smears and insane allegations by bad faith people, by disingenuous, oftentimes just outright garbage actors. So I really do not want to spend a whole lot of time on this. But briefly, and really just briefly, I wrote an article yesterday for the Daily Mail, the well-known British newspaper, right of center perhaps in its editorial slant. And this article was about the topic that we discussed on yesterday's show with our guest Seth Dillon of Babylon Bee, which was Tucker Carlson having the noted neo-Nazi and Holocaust denier Nick Fuentes on his show earlier this week. And you can read the article for yourself. I'm proud of it. I thought it was a very strong article, if I don't say so myself. There is literally one word in the final line or two of the article that all the usual suspects, Candace Owens, Dave Smith, in this case even Marjorie Taylor Greene, just latched onto to accuse me of an insane and frankly dangerous thing that I in no way whatsoever intended to say. The line was talking about how, and the longtime listeners and viewers will be familiar with this, my opinion is that this wing of the party, the Tucker Carlson wing, the Carlson, Candace Owens wing, whatever you want to call it, that they actually intend to burn down MAGA as it currently exists and to build a new movement in its place. To do that, the goal is to humiliate not merely the tiny minority that are Jews, but the very large plurality that are religious Christians, oftentimes evangelical Christians with a philo-Semitic or pro-Israel bent. So they're trying to burn down MAGA and build something quite harrowing in its place. So with that context in mind, I conclude this article by saying the fox is well ensconced inside the henhouse, and it must be neutralized for the sake of the GOP coalition, by which I obviously meant that these are dangerous ideas, that these are dangerous influences, and that the ideas, the policy proposals, and in some extent, the general worldview of the Tucker Carlsons and Nick Fuenteses of the world must be condemned. And in the battle of ideas within the right-of-center fold, within the MAGA coalition, it is imperative that the forces of sanity prevail over the forces of insanity. Indeed, that is going to be a leitmotif, a recurring theme of this show. We are on Team Sanity on this show. We are on Team Sane MAGA, not Team Insane, burn it all down and build some godforsaken, neo-pagan, anti-Western, anti-biblical construct in its place. That's all I meant by neutralize. But no, the same idiots who took my tweet about the murderer of Irina Zarutska and calling for the death penalty for Zarutska's murderer, the same idiots glommed onto this word neutralize and said, oh my God, Josh is calling for the assassination of Tucker Carlson. No, I'm not. You absolute appalling brain-dead idiots. Stop putting words in my mouth. The Daily Mail is a well-known British newspaper. 3 editors reviewed this column, and no one for a second batted an eyelash that I meant anything other than what I obviously meant, which is that this influence and these policies have to be neutralized. And the way to neutralize that is by counteracting it, by winning out in the battle of ideas. That is all I meant. And if you think anything to the contrary, then you are frankly just a bad faith actor, willfully disingenuous, and or a complete and total moron. Well, as mentioned, we're thrilled to be joined now by my friend Alex Marlow. Alex is the editor-in-chief of Breitbart. He's also the host of The Alex Marlow Show, our sister show here on the Salem Podcast Network. His new book, Breaking the Law, Exposing the Weaponization of America's Legal System Against Donald Trump. There's a lot to discuss with you, Alex, but we're grateful for you for joining the program. Thank you very much.
Yeah, same to you, Josh, and congrats on the new show. Glad you're here.
It's a thrill to be here, my friend. It's wonderful to be your formal colleague in addition to your friend. So, look, in the opening monologue, we were talking a lot about Arctic frost. Arctic frost, the big news out of D.C. of the week, this sprawling nearly 200 subpoenas that was the predicate for Jack Smith's witch hunt, this crusade against Donald Trump and his various co-defendants in the January 6th prosecution, that particular part of the Democrat lawfare complex, as I've called it. Talk to us just about the meaning of Arctic frost. I think the media, Alex, is trying to do kind of the old, Barry job here. I have not seen a whole lot of coverage, to put it mildly, of the New York Times, CNN, places like that. They're really trying to pretend like this story is not happening. But it's a pretty big deal. So just talk to us about your interpretation as to what we saw out of Washington just yesterday.
Yeah, so Arctic frost, obviously controversial thing, is an FBI investigation that was launched in first half of 2022 under Joe Biden. And it was initially supposed to be about these false electors that was a scheme that was not really a scheme from President Trump, where he was putting himself in a position where, should there have been a successful contestation to some of the statewide election results, that he was prepared to have electors vote on his behalf. This is actually something that was pioneered by Democrats. I think it was John Kennedy, if our memory serves, who had alternate electors prepared for the Hawaii during a race, a half a century ago or more. And Trump was doing the exact same thing, which maybe you don't like it or you think that's nasty, but it certainly had a precedent, and the Democrats set the precedent. And the Democrats, with their political talking point that Trump was engaging in a war on democracy, which was not the case. Trump peaceably stepped down when all of the avenues of contesting the election failed. But there is insistence that he was anti-democracy. They used this as a pretext to investigate a lot of people who were close to Donald Trump, prominent Republicans, prominent conservatives, elected officials, Trump allies, various organizations. And all this came from Jack Smith. And Jack Smith's appointment was unconstitutional. Thank you for mentioning Breaking the Law, my best-selling book, which is about some of what the Biden administration did to target Trump and, I believe, to rig an election and to subvert our democracy. And Jack Smith is, of course, one of the supervillains because his appointment as special counsel was blatantly unconstitutional. It never should have existed. It was not a real job, and yet he was allowed to harass people for 18 or 19 months with impunity, and this was part of the harassment that we've just learned. And then eventually people figured out he shouldn't even be here. It's like the movie Office Space where Milton didn't even have a job, and he'd been working there. And it was like, oh yeah, you got to leave. But he still was leaking the Washington Post in particular, but all over the media, all sorts of dirt. And all of this was massive fishing operation. And now we're here. And Josh, I'm guessing you're not shocked to see any of this stuff. I'm certainly not.
I mean, first of all, what a reference, Office Space. I mean, that's a total throwback to kind of the late 1990s. I mean, my childhood, I think you and I, Alex, are of a similar age. So I kind of, I mean, that I literally owned that movie on DVD back in the day. We used to watch it, we used to watch it on repeat. But no, you're totally right. I'm not shocked in the slightest. And I guess the question that some Americans, maybe even some conservatives are asking now is, well, what now? I mean, we see these new revelations, 197 groups that were apparently subpoenaed. And by the way, we're talking here about big household names. Senator Ted Cruz was subpoenaed. Jack Smith subpoenaed Ted Cruz's cell phone records with AT&T. The Donald Trump campaign, the RNC, the Conservative Partnership Institute, aka CPI, one of the most well-known conservative organizations on Capitol Hill. So I guess the question then is, Alex, so Jack Smith, or to your point, so-called special counsel Jack Smith, as I call him, because he was not legally...
It was fake. It was fake special
totally
counsel.
Fake.
Yeah.
So now that he is out of the picture, I mean, he moved back to the United States from Europe. So for all I know, maybe he's back in Europe. I don't even know where he physically is there. But now that's gone, what now? I mean, what should the right do? What should the Trump administration do in light of these current revelations?
Well, the first thing is to point out who are the people who were involved, and a lot of the top people who had approval of this were Christopher Wray, who's well known to anyone who follows conservative media, and Merrick Garland, who, even though seems like a nice guy, was a huge villain breaking the law, and his deputy, Lisa Monaco, who I know Donald Trump has singled out in my interviews with him as the single greatest perpetrator of modern day lawfare and is not a household name. I think she's got a lot of competition for that prize, but I'll tell you, whenever I talk to Trump in the lead up to the book and researching the book, that was the name off the tip of his tongue first. Lisa Monaco was the deputy attorney general during Biden's DOJ. And it seems like she was really instrumental in pushing this forward. So it's just one of those things where the first step is understanding how serious the lawfare superstructure is. We're just starting to understand it. It's so vast. It's so complicated that I think almost no one has it completely committed to memory. Maybe there's a half a dozen people who follow this stuff full time who truly understand the depth of it. And they're not going to stop. These are highly trained people. They're highly funded, highly organized. And this is the resistance to Donald Trump at this time. It's not AOC. It's not Mamdani. It's not Chuck Schumer. These are the people who have been the biggest threat to Donald Trump over the last 5 years.
Alex Marlow, folks, is the editor-in-chief of Breitbart, host of our sister show in the Salem Podcast Network, The Alex Marlow Show. Follow him on X at Alex Marlow, on Instagram at Marlow News. His new book is Breaking the Law, Exposing the Weaponization of America's Legal System Against Donald Trump. And congratulations, once again, by the way, Alex, on the fantastic new book. So let's kind of zoom out then from Arctic Frost specifically and talk about the basic premise of your book, something that, as a lawyer myself, I've been covering, over and over again for the past few years, as we saw the historically unprecedented weaponization of the DOJ under President Biden, with Merrick Garland and Lisa Monaco, and obviously so-called special counsel Jack Smith as well. Why don't you try to contextualize what we saw there? Specifically, I guess it would have been from 2023, from the commencement of the two DOJ prosecutions against President Trump in both my state of Florida and in Washington, D.C., the latter of which came on the heels of this Arctic frost probe. So why don't you just contextualize what we saw there in the grander history of the nearly now 250 years of the American Republic.
Yeah, it's interesting because I start the first portion of Breaking the Law. And it's very kind of you. I didn't know this would be such a big topic today, but it does fit with the news. It's great to talk about something you spend so much time and energy on. I know you've written books yourself, and I know you know that it's always nice to talk about something when you're on you're on comfy footing. But it's one of these things where I track the whole history of lawfare and its sort of companion, which is judicial activism, and the rise of when Democrats started to begin to use this as a tactic. Of course, Joe Biden really accelerated it with the borking of Robert Bork and the high-tech lynching of Clarence Thomas. And then Barack Obama and Eric Holder accelerated it by a very quick clip. And then Joe Biden just used it as his main way of doing political damage to the standard bearer of the Republican Party, Donald Trump, and also his supporters. I track all that stuff, but really the centerpiece is going through those 6 major cases against Trump, and there were 6. And I'll tell you, Josh, as editor-in-chief of Breitbart News, I couldn't keep them all straight. If you quiz me on which case was that from, like even I wouldn't know. And so I felt like, well, if I don't know, then the public definitely doesn't know. I mean, maybe there's a couple of people who hang out on social media all day who sort it out, but really almost no one. And I'll tell you a couple of key points that people do not understand and should offend every American is, first of all 6 of these cases employed novel legal theories. This will speak to you as a lawyer. Not one of the 6 cases was something where there was clear precedent that Trump had violated some sort of law in the civil cases, some sort of ordinance or whatever, or even some sort of societal norm. There's not one instance where it was clear that by precedent that Trump had done something wrong, and they still figured out ways to put him on trial. And that is across the board, 6 out of 6. I could go through the examples, but that should resonate with people already. And second of all, and this is deeply offensive as well, all 6 cases had coordination with the Biden White House. Even one case you would think would be impeachable. Even one case you would think that nullifies the whole presidency and there should be, a public show trial with Joe Biden in the hot seat. But none of that happened. All 6 cases had either someone from the upper echelons of Biden's White House or Biden DOJ going down to a lower court to try to finish off Trump, or people from those courts going to and from the White House clearly coordinating on these cases. All of this is violation of due process and just basic constitutional principles. And you do not have to be a constitutional scholar or an attorney to figure out that that's just not okay. You don't go after your political opponents in that way. And they did it 6 times and got away with it. Aside from the fact the American people were able to hold the Biden administration accountable in the end.
There's a famous quote from the Peruvian strongman Oscar Benavides. I think it was Benavides who first said, "For my friends, everything; for my enemies, the law." Right, yeah. And this is kind of a play on that, is what we saw over the course of the Biden DOJ. I mean, genuinely historically unprecedented stuff. I mean, the notion of trying to incarcerate, of trying to send to jail, to bankrupt, to do all these things to your chief political opponent has absolutely no precedent in American history. I mean, go back even to our English forebears and Anglo-American history going back probably 1,000 years. I mean, it is a foreign cultural import, frankly, into the American legal and political system. And one question for you, Alex, and it's something that I've thought a lot about over the past couple of years, is how the right, more broadly speaking, ought to respond in kind. Because I'll be honest with you, I see a lot of people that say, "Oh, we want to just restore the equal notion of rule of law." Look, I literally clerk for a federal appeals judge, okay? I literally clerk. I've spoken at like Harvard, Yale Law School. No one believes in equal protection of the law more than me. The question is, if the right just says that as its end goal right now, are we actually going to achieve that? Because it seems to me like some sort of basic game theory is that you might just have to short-term escalate to get a mid to long-term truce. And that is the context, frankly, in which I see some, at least some of what's happened, the John Bolton indictment there, Jim Comey and so forth there. That's basically how I see it. Is that how you see it as well?
Yeah, that's mostly how I see it. I have a lot of recommendations and in the book in terms of investigations that need to take place. I've organized a lot of those also at Breitbart.com. If you want a cheat sheet, I have a lot of those. You can search for my byline at Breitbart News, and you can get some of those. But I make a lot of recommendations, and the DOJ's clearly paying attention and following through on some of these, Tish James, Jack Smith, the people that they're going after now. The fact that the Tish James, one of the penalties against Trump was thrown out because of cruel and unusual punishment is something I wrote about in the book, that even though it was a civil case, the $500 million for a victimless crime,
case,
well,
right,
a victimless non-crime, really.
Right.
Was obviously cruel and unusual, and I don't think a lot of people had considered that a cruel and unusual punishment can't apply to a civil court. There's nothing that confines it just to a criminal court. And so that was something I recommended, and immediately we saw action on that. So I'm not saying I'm taking full credit. There's a lot of smart attorneys around, but it is stuff that I clearly recommended in the book, and we're seeing action on it, which is very cool. And you have to start holding people to their own standards. And with John Bolton, he was someone who is clearly had classified documents and handled them inappropriately to try to make money off a book. I think that seems to be open and shut. And when they're going after Donald Trump, who had broad declassification privileges, and then they tried to put him in jail and to make it so he couldn't run for president because he had some classified documents. And then you look around and every other president and a bunch of vice presidents and senators and generals and CIA directors all had done the same things or worse and never had declassification privileges, never even had the option, and they got wrist slaps or less. Then you start thinking, well, I mean, how is this fair? It's not fair. And so that's why Bolton's going to be in trouble. Tish James in the mortgage fraud. She tried to bust Trump for changing the values of properties so we can get favorable loans and better tax breaks. Well, he wasn't doing any of that. She was. And so she's busted. So I think it's a great playbook the Trump administration is following. And so you got to investigate, always legitimate, never for political harassment. Make sure you got the goods. But when you do, you've got to bring the wood to these people.
Alex Marlow is the editor-in-chief of Breitbart over at Breitbart.com. You can follow him on X at Alex Marlow. His show, The Alex Marlow Show, available everywhere podcasts are available. Alex, let's talk about one of the other D.C. scandals of the week, which is the auto pen scandal. This is Jim Comer, the chairman of the House Oversight Committee of Kentucky, who has now concluded, based on his committee's research, that there were indeed many other people inside the Biden administration, which is probably the least surprising thing in the world to folks like me and you. But there indeed were, according to Congressman Comer and the committee, plenty of other folks who were issuing commutations and pardons and signing God knows what, executive orders, who the heck knows, frankly, over the final year, 2 years, whatever the timeline may be of the Biden presidency. And they are referring to Pam Bondi's DOJ for possible action to review the legality of the pardons commutations. I'm skeptical that much is going to happen of this from kind of a strictly black letter law perspective. What do you think is going to happen? And is this as big a deal as some folks think it is?
Yeah, it's hard to know whether or not we're trolling / phishing or whether or not there's actually something hard and fast here, and it's really fun as news people to kind of go through and figure out which one is which, because it just does seem like the examples I just gave, the Tish James, John Bolton, it seems like there really could be some problems for these people on a legal front, and that's very exciting. Oh, yeah. But I think we just need to investigate and look into things. That was their approach to us, and that's what they've always done, is they've always presumed guilt and then started the investigation, and then if we get cleared, like with the Russian collusion hoax, then we get cleared. But that's always the way they've operated, and we need to use their playbook a lot. This is something that I've advocated my entire career in media. I grew up in LA. I went to UC Berkeley. I've seen how the left operates. And I think applying their playbook to them is really important. And I think that's what's going on here. And I think that's a very productive thing to do, because they have a lot of guilt. And we've been afraid because we've been playing by the Marquis of Queensberry's rules, as Andrew Breitbart used to put it. And we can't do that anymore. That said, I don't want to lose the moral high ground. So I don't want to harass people politically. There's enough people who deserve it for illegality that we can look into them first. But the bottom line, Josh, is we also need to stay in this war footing. We cannot rest on our laurels. We cannot ever assume it's peacetime ever again. The left is trying to destroy this country. They're trying to destroy us. They're trying to assassinate some of our top generals. They're celebrating the assassination of Charlie Kirk to this day. They were still doing it at the No Kings rally. They're going to do it on Halloween. I don't know when the show's going to come out, but it's the Halloween. You're going to see people dressed up as dead Charlie Kirk. I mean, these are sick freaks, and we need to use whatever means possible to make sure they never attain more political power.
For me personally, Alex, I think one of my really red pill moments, I'm saying that, in a relative perspective, I've been on the right my entire life. But to me, one of the real moments that made me go from kind of a normie con to like holy crap. I mean, these people are literally trying to destroy civilization. They think that we're all rapes and murders. I mean, for me, that moment was the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearing in September 2018. I was kind of trending that way already, but that hearing really put me over the line. And certainly, I mean, so much of what we've seen since then. I mean, vast swaths of what the Biden DOJ administration did for 4 years, much of which we have discussed just in the past 15, 20 minutes here. I mean, much of that, I think, was just yet more red-pilling moments. So we're obviously not living in a peacetime conservative world. I mean, at this point, we are all wartime consigliaries, and if you're not that, then you're in the wrong freaking industry. I mean, get the heck out of Dodge. I don't really know what you're doing here. But look, we'll see where that particular investigation goes. I mean, I'm just saying, I don't know exactly what remedies might be there, but it is absolutely worth trying to get to the bottom of it, make sure that we know exactly what happened there. If there are any statutes that could possibly be applicable there, I'm all for prosecuting, no doubt about that. One other issue, Alex, that I would love to get your take on before we let you go. You mentioned Breitbart, which you're the very capable editor-in-chief of. Breitbart was very much at the tip of the spear of the nationalist populist revolution as far back as a decade or more ago. And one of the issues that I associate with that is China. China used to be a somewhat debatable issue on the American right. Once upon a time, there were a lot of China toughs. I mean, even in kind of even during the Obama era, before the rise of Trump, even in the first Trump administration, you still had some folks who thought that China could be welcomed into the global community of nations and free trade, liberalized, blah 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 blah. But these days, that's just not the case, and that's kind of the context for Trump sitting down literally just this morning over in South Korea with Xi Jinping. There's not a whole lot in the way of details yet. It looks like China has dropped their rare earth export restrictions, which is a huge win there, and in kind, Donald Trump is going to lower the fentanyl tariffs on China there. What is your basic take as to the U.S.-China relationship in this second Trump term, and what specifically would you like to see happen if this talk is actually formalized in a deal?
Yeah, China are rivals and the world stage. And I think that people who are students of the way they operate know that they're very sophisticated. They're very committed to having a China-centric globe. They think that's going to happen this century. And we don't want that to happen. American power has been an incredibly peaceful and unifying force in the world, and we want that to be the case. We want America. I'm not saying that we needed to have a bunch of territorial conquests, though I wouldn't mind picking up Greenland or a couple other spots here or there. But overall, we want an America-centric world, and China is opposed to us in many ways, and they're very predatory. They do things to steal our property. Their fentanyl kills us. They poach a bunch of American jobs traditionally, and they also are horrible stewards of the environment. If you're a left-wing person, that they're still building new coal-fired power plants right now. So there's a reason for, if you're if you're like me, a freedom-loving person, they're a communist state, of course, totalitarian. They don't have a free press. There's so many reasons to dislike China, but also they're a Leviathan. So their reality. And we're not going to destroy China, and I certainly don't want a hot war with China. So we need to be able to have a shrewd negotiator be able to make it so that we are the alphas in the world, but we're also working, I think, cooperatively with them in some ways as well. And this is a really tough puzzle because they are adversaries, but they're also the only other superpower on earth at the moment. And I think Trump sees this very clearly. He's the perfect guy to have this reset where China, you recall Joe Biden saying, they're not going to eat our lunch, man. And China absolutely was eating our lunch under Joe Biden, and they would have continued to eat our lunch under Kamala Harris. So Trump meets with Xi. He says the meeting's a 12 out of 10. So China's going to buy a bunch of our soybeans and oil and gas, and that's big. I mean, that's a really big accomplishment for Trump. Xi said he's going to cut down on fentanyl trade, which would be great. I mean, he should eliminate it, but look, sometimes you got to crawl before you can walk. And we don't have full details as of yet of what was exactly agreed to, and they're going to meet again in the first half of next year. But I think Trump is setting a bar a little bit higher for China, and I think Xi understands that with populism and nationalism ascendant in America, along that comes China skepticism, then then they're going to have to play ball with us. And it feels good. It feels good today.
No, it definitely feels good. So on the one hand, not to freak the audience out too much, but there are some U.S. military strategists who do a whole war game exercise if, God forbid, the People's Liberation Army actually invades Taiwan. And there are some war games that actually have China winning. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, from a strictly economic perspective, the United States has all the leverage in the world. We are still by far the stronger economy in virtually any way that an economy or, frankly, a society more generally is orchestrated there. And as long as Trump and his team understand that, which, as you just said, I'm fairly confident they do. In fact, they're the best possible people to really negotiate this deal. I think that the final product that's negotiated is going to end up looking quite good. So one final time, folks, Alex Marlow is editor-in-chief of Breitbart and host of the Alex Marlow Show, our system show on Salem Podcast Network. Check out his book, Breaking the Law, Exposing the Weaponization of America's Legal System Against Donald Trump. Alex, you're a friend, and as of now, you're a colleague. So thanks so much for joining the Josh Hammer Show today.
Yeah, I appreciate you, Josh. I'm really happy you have the show, and let's do these more often.